In this lecture or review, I want to go over Chapter 3 and some of the concepts that are presented there. In Chapters 1 and 2, you got a sense of the different inventory accounts that a manufacturer would have. You looked at typical costs that go into manufacturing a product. You started separating those costs into things that were called product costs and others that were called period costs. You learned that the product costs went into the inventory accounts. They were things like direct materials, direct labor, overhead. They flowed into work in process, then eventually to finished goods, and then eventually to the cost of goods sold account. And you learned there were these other costs, period costs, and they showed up on the income statement as expenses, general and administrative or selling expenses. We're going to take a look at those same costs today, but classify them in a different way. So let's take a look at some of the costs that I have listed here. Direct materials, you've learned that that's a product cost because it directly involves making the product. Product costs deal with the factory, not with the store or the administration. Sales commissions, that would have been a period cost, and specifically in the selling expenses category. Property taxes on the factory being the key word, told us that it was a product cost and specifically overhead. If it's product, it's either going to be direct materials, direct labor, or overhead. Since property taxes aren't materials or labor, they get thrown in overhead. Utilities, this one's too vague for us to tell. Where were the utilities? Were they utilities in the office building, in the store, or in the factory? So if we say they're in the factory, then it's just like the property taxes. Direct labor, we learned, is a product cost, and it's direct labor. That would be its subcategory. The president's salary, however, is a labor cost, but because it's not for somebody directly making the product, matter of fact, it's not even something necessarily in the factory, it's going to be considered a period cost and go in what we call general and administrative expenses. Hopefully that stuff is a review of what you saw in chapters 1 and 2. Where I want to go is two new classifications, one called variable costs and the other fixed costs. I told you these videos are always going to show you how bad I type. Variable costs are the ones that change when production or sales levels change. We'll word wrap that so it fits a little better there. And I'm going to shorten this one. That really should say don't change when production or sales levels change. So our two classifications all have to do with whether they fluctuate when production or sales fluctuates. Are they correlated? If you remember statistics classes and all those correlations. So let's take a look at a few examples of things that would fit in each category. Direct materials is definitely a variable cost. The more products you make, the more you're going to spend on direct materials. In contrast, the president's salary is going to be fixed. It doesn't matter whether you made 1,000 units or 2,000 units. You probably have a contract with the president that says his or her salary will be this much per year. That's fixed. Other common ones. Direct labor variable. Again, the textbook uses the assumption that you're going to have a fluctuating pool of people and hours of labor time. If you don't make too many products, then you don't spend too much on labor. In some places, you can make the argument that the union contract calls for 40 hours of work, whether those 40 hours are used or not, if there's downtime because of machines breaking or whatever, that the employees are still going to be paid for the full day shift. To avoid the complication, the textbook is going to make the assumption that it is strictly almost like what we consider day laborers, those that are hired on a per diem basis and paid just for the hours that they're worked. So if production isn't happening today, there wouldn't be labor cost. So when production goes up, the costs go up. You can't put overhead down in either category. Overhead is made up of all those miscellaneous costs. You have to look at each one of those miscellaneous costs separately. And I would say utilities would be something that would be variable. If you're making more products, you're probably using more electricity to run the machines to make more products. Something like property taxes are probably a flat amount. The governing agency, government agency, the township, the city, whatever that's levying the property taxes, doesn't say, well, how many products did you make? Because your taxes are going to be higher if you made more products. They just look at the value of the property and the building and so on and levy the taxes. So even though those may change from year to year, they don't correlate with the level of production. That kind of gives you an idea, I hope, on how to put something in the variable or fixed category. We are going to be looking more at fixed and variable costs when we do a break-even analysis. One thing that you'll want to do before you get into the break-even analysis is you'll want to be able to look at what you will see called mixed costs. That's just a hybrid of fixed and variable. A mixed cost is somewhat fixed and some variable. I know. Just when you thought it actually made some sense, then I throw a complication at you. Let me give you some really simple ideas of what types of costs would be. Let's say you rent a copy machine, a fancy printer, however you want to refer to it. And your copy machine rent is $200 a month, no matter what you do. Even if it just sits there in the office and never gets used, you pay $200 a month. But then you also have to pay half a cent per copy, or some number per copy. I know that doesn't make the math work out very well at such a rate, but that would determine your bill to the place you rent the copy machine from. So you can see that if you make more copies, your bill goes up. You make no copies, your bill is smaller. But there's this level, it doesn't go down to completely zero, the way direct materials would. If you make no products, you have zero direct materials. With our copy machine rent, if you make no products, and let's say that correlates to how many copies you make on a copy machine, you still have to make a $200 payment. You have a $200 cost no matter what. So we call that the fixed portion, and the half a cent per copy is the variable portion. So this is actually a little bit of both. And you'll see a cost formula written. It's going to look a little confusing, but it is just trying to say that same thing. It's going to say the total cost is equal to the fixed amount plus, and in this case, 0 cents, times the number of copies. So our formula here would be $200 plus times the number of copies. This would be used in budgeting. The company's trying to figure out what their copy machine costs will be next month, next year. They only need to figure out how many copies they think they're going to create, and they'll know their estimated cost. This could be the same way with several of the costs. There might be a minimum that they know they must pay. This could be salespeople's salaries and commissions. Work the same way. There's a salary component and there's a commission that definitely would go up with the amount of sales. There are 2 lectures already loaded into Unit 4 that you can click on, and they open to 2 YouTube videos. One of them talks about the high-low method. I'm going to scroll over here and just write that down, high-low method. And that is a way to separate the mixed costs into their fixed and variable parts. It is only a way of estimating. It's not perfect, but it's a fairly simple method. You can do statistical methods such as linear regressions and analysis, which aren't so bad to do when you've got computers and programs to do them. But for our sake, we're just going to look at a simple method to separate the costs and get a ballpark idea of the rate per month and the part that's going to change with production. So watch that video. That will help you do some of your homework in Chapter 3 that will involve separating the costs into their different components. And hopefully, you're also getting good at deciding fixed and variable costs. Like I said, we'll be using those in break even. Break even's discussed in the second lecture, and I think it does a pretty good job of explaining it. So take a look at that lecture. Let me know if you're having trouble, and then we can figure out what parts of break even are getting a little confusing, or what parts of high-low, and talk about your questions in chapters 3 and 4.